The sound was unmistakable, the hollow thud of a body meeting the mat, followed by the echo that rolled to the training hall like a gunshot. For a long moment, no one breathed. 40 trainees, sweat dripping down their necks, boots planted on the polished floor, stood frozen. All eyes locked on the fallen figure of Senior Chief Kestrel, their instructor, sprawled unconscious beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Standing over him was the one they had all dismissed, the one they had sworn wouldn't last a week, let alone survive real combat. Lieutenant Briarthorn didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply adjusted her stance, her breathing calm and measured, her eyes forward as if this outcome had been inevitable. 3 precise movements had ended the exchange. That was all it took. Until this morning, Thorn was an experiment in their eyes, a public relations stunt force on the program by politics, an outsider, a woman in a place where strength and endurance were the currencies of survival. But the silence in that room wasn't just shock. It was recalculation. For the first time, the trainees realized they hadn't been watching a curiosity. They'd been underestimating a weapon. From the corner, Master Chief Langford's voice cut the silence. At ease. The command rippled through the room, but the spell of disbelief lingered. Medics jogged in, kneeling beside Kestrel's broad-shouldered frame. His chest rose and fell. His eyelids fluttered. He was alive, though his pride might take longer to recover. Thorn didn't flinch. She stood at parade rest, her expression impassive, her posture steady. There was no triumph in her eyes, only the same detached composure she had carried since day 1 of training. Langford stepped forward, his silver hair catching the overhead light, his eyes sharp. He had seen war in every theater since Desert Storm, and it took a lot to impress him. His gaze swept across the trainees before settling on Thorn. "You've been training beside Lieutenant Thorn for weeks now," he said. "What you fail to realize is that she wasn't here to learn the basics. She already mastered them years ago." Confusion rippled through the formation. A few glanced at one another, searching for answers in each other's faces. Langford continued, voice low but cutting through the silence. Lieutenant Thorn served with Echo Sentinel, a unit so classified most of you have never heard the name. Their specialty wasn't force of arms. It was something more precise. Neural targeting. Anatomy as a battlefield. Some trainees blinked, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Others shifted uncomfortably, realizing the reality of what it meant. The instructors at the edge of the mat, men who had scoffed at her presence, exchanged wary glances. Langford turned back to her, his voice carrying a weight that none of them had expected to hear directed at a trainee. Lieutenant Thorn wasn't just a member. She was one of their lead instructors. What you just saw wasn't luck. It was decades of refinement. On the mat, Kestrel groaned, pushing himself up with the medic's help. His usually commanding presence had fractured. His gaze flicked to Thorn, confusion, then dawning realization, then something closer to respect. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. Langford answered before she could. That was the future of close-quarters combat. Precision, not power. Nerves, not muscles. Technique, that doesn't care about size or weight. The weight of the words settled over the room. The class wasn't staring at a novelty anymore. They were staring at someone who had just rewritten the rules. Hours earlier, none of them would have believed this moment possible. At sunrise, Lieutenant Thorn had been just another figure on the beach. Smaller, leaner, her frame half hidden behind the broad silhouettes of her male counterparts. She had jogged up the sand in soaked fatigues, boots heavy with water, carrying her share of the inflatable boat. Her breathing had been steady, her posture upright, not flashy, not commanding, but precise. They had mocked her in whispers. Bets had been made on when she would quit. The men called her barracks the supply shed, a joke about the Navy's decision to house her separately. They called her presence special treatment. She called it irrelevant. When the others stumbled to breakfast half dead with exhaustion, she ate in silence, ignored the stares, endured the muttered comments. She wasn't there for acceptance. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there for something bigger. The combat training room still smelled of disinfectant, though sweat and adrenaline had already thickened the air. Class 358 stood in formation, some leaning slightly from fatigue, others still vibrating with restless energy. They had come expecting another lecture in grappling, another reminder that size mattered and that physics had limits. Kestrel had reinforced those ideas ruthlessly, until he had called Thorne to the mat. She hadn't hesitated. No protest. No plea for fairness. Just quiet steps forward and a stance that looked unfamiliar to most, but triggered recognition in Langford's sharp eyes. Kestrel's attacks had been real, not staged. He had lunged with the weight of his experience, decades of training behind every strike. And yet each attempt met the same result. A subtle redirection, a counter executed with surgical precision. The first strike had numbed his arm before anyone realized what she had done. The second had toppled his balance without brute strength. The third, a precise pressure at the base of his skull, had ended it all. Now, the shock of that takedown lingered like smoke after an explosion. Langford faced the class once more. You've just seen the difference between surviving and dominating. Some of you will dismiss it. Some of you will learn from it. But remember this. Combat doesn't care about your pride. Neither do your enemies. The medics helped Kestrel stand. He swayed but steadied himself, his jaw set. He studied Thorne for a long moment, then extended a hand. I underestimated you, Lieutenant. Won't happen again. She accepted the handshake with a nod. Your technique was textbook perfect, Senior Chief. But textbooks are always a generation behind reality. A faint ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. Even Kestrel allowed himself the ghost of a smile, pride dented but not broken. The class buzzed quietly as they filed out, their earlier certainty shattered. No longer was Lieutenant Thorne simply the woman doomed to fail. Now she was a problem they couldn't solve, a mystery that demanded respect. And for the first time, she wasn't just training alongside them. She was standing above them. By the time she returned to her barracks that evening, the whispers had already shifted. Some spoke of her as a threat, others as a teacher. None dismissed her anymore. Briar Thorne sat at the small desk in the corner of her solitary quarters, her body aching from the day's exertions. She reached into her footlocker and pulled out a photograph. A group of operators stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces shadowed, their insignias obscured. She traced the edge of the picture with her thumb before placing it back carefully. 3 weeks down. The hardest part still ahead. But for the first time, she knew the truth had begun to surface. She wasn't here to survive. She was here to change everything. The Pacific was black glass under the early morning sky, broken only by the white froth of waves and the straining figures of Class 358. 42 men and 1 woman fought their way through knee-deep surf, inflatable boats hoisted above their heads. The boats glistened with salt water, dripping down onto the recruits' faces and backs. Every step was punishment. Boots sank into the sucking sand. Shoulders burned under the awkward weight of rubber hulls. The line staggered, regrouped, staggered again. Breath came in ragged bursts, but no one dared fall out of formation. Not when the instructors stalked the shoreline like wolves, their voices carrying over the waves. Among the moving silhouettes, Lieutenant Briar Thorne kept her place at the rear. Smaller than most of the men, she looked like a shadow swallowed by their bulk. Her steps were deliberate, her arms steady. She didn't try to match their raw strength. She moved with precision that kept her pace even, conserving what little energy the ocean and sand hadn't already stolen. It was the 3rd week of training. 17 candidates had already quit. Their bell, hung on the compound's parade ground, had rung again and again, each clang echoing like a death knell over the program's brutal rhythm. The men who had given up had walked away, heads low, bodies broken, pride crushed. Thorne was still here. Eyes front, barked Instructor Garrick from the beach, his voice carried by the wind. Nobody's going to carry you in combat. Move. His gaze lingered on Thorne, his tone dripping with the same challenge he had repeated since day one. But she didn't react, didn't blink, didn't break stride. The class reached the shore, staggering up the incline as the tide pulled at their legs. Wet sand clung to their boots, sucking at every step. When they finally dropped the boats on command, the release of weight sent several men to their knees, gasping for air. Thorne stayed on her feet, her chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she forced her body into control. Years of conditioning had taught her that the body obeyed rhythm. Breath was weapon, not weakness. 10 minutes for hygiene, Garrick shouted. Performance evaluation at 0900. The class broke apart. Shoulders slumped, bodies moving like puppets with strings cut. They shuffled back toward the barracks, each man dragging exhaustion behind him. Thorne walked alone, turning toward the squat building the Navy had refitted for her. Once it had been a supply shed. Now it was her quarters, an arrangement that underlined her outsider status with cruel efficiency. Some whispered it was privilege. Others called it segregation. She thought of it as irrelevant. Walls were walls. A bunk was a bunk. Comfort was an illusion here anyway. Inside, the dim light revealed where the past weeks etched into her skin. Rope burns striped her palms. Bruises bloomed along her ribs. She stripped her wet clothes and moved with quiet purpose, cleaning each wound, disinfecting, bandaging. Every motion was practiced, clinical, detached. She had treated worse injuries in worse places. The mirror above her small sink reflected a face younger than her 33 years suggested, but with eyes that had grown old. Her hair was cropped short, regulation neat. No makeup, no jewelry, no softness. The only difference between her and the others was the one she couldn't hide. Outside, instructors gathered in the shade of the administration building. Senior Chief Kestrel flipped through her file, while Chief Wharton watched. Half her service records blacked out, Kestrel muttered. Whatever she did overseas doesn't matter. Nature has limits. Women's bodies aren't built for this. Admiral Swick disagrees. Wharton replied carefully. He ordered she be here. Admirals never had to drag a teammate twice the size out of a combat zone. Kestrel snapped, slamming the file shut. Hell weeks in 10 days. She won't make it. None of them do. The words carried just far enough for Thorne to hear from the open window of the equipment shed. She didn't flinch, didn't even pause in pulling her boots on. Words were just noise. She'd learned long ago not to waste energy on them. Later, she returned to her quarters, sliding a worn photograph from her footlocker. A group of soldiers posed in front of a crumbling wall, their unit patches deliberately obscured, faces shadowed by dust and fatigue, eyes carrying the weight of things unspoken. She traced the edges of the photo with one finger, then tucked it back carefully and closed the lid. 3 weeks down. The worst was still coming. She had heard the whispers. Bets made over when she'd quit. No one put money on her finishing. Not the trainees. Not even the instructors pretending to neutrality. That didn't bother her. Survival had never depended on their faith. Breakfast in the mess hall was 18 minutes of silence, utensils clinking against metal trays. Thorne sat at the far end of a table, leaving an empty chair on either side. Most ignored her. A few whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear. She kept her eyes on her tray, chewing with machine-like precision. Trainee Wythe, broad-shouldered, the size of a college wrestler, dropped his tray across from her. His smile was wide, but his tone made Lieutenant sound like an insult. Morning. Ready for evaluations? Heard it's upper body today. Thorne looked up, meeting his gaze for a beat. Looking forward to it. He chuckled, turning to the men beside him. Maybe they'll grade on a curve. Special female standards, right? There's only one standard, she said evenly. The one that keeps you alive in the field. His smile faltered before returning. Guess we'll see. The evaluations were a blur of sweat and pain. Pull-ups, push-ups, obstacle courses, swims. Instructors shouted numbers, scribbling them on clipboards. When Thorne reached 17 pull-ups, her body trembling with effort, Garrick's voice cut the silence. Minimum standard met. No mention that she'd exceeded it by nearly half. No recognition that she'd done it with bruised ribs and rope burns searing her hands. Just the minimum. She dropped from the bar, landing lightly, expression unreadable. She didn't need their approval. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't about applause. That afternoon, they filed into the combat training room. The air was thick with sweat and cleaning solution. The men stood in formation, faces taut with fatigue. Thorne took her place at the back row, posture perfect. Senior Chief Kestrel entered. His presence filled the room. His body was still cut from years of war, scars carved into his skin like maps. His eyes were sharp, cold, merciless. "Today," he said, "we learn how to neutralize threats without weapons. Strength matters. Technique matters. When someone wants to kill you, your body is your only lifeline." He began pairing the men, skipping Thorn each time. A small humiliation, subtle but deliberate. The men exchanged knowing looks. An hour into drills, Wythe raised his hand. "Sir, shouldn't female operators learn modified techniques, since they'll never overpower a male combatant?" A ripple of smirks spread through the instructors. Kestrel nodded. "Valid question." He scanned the room before his gaze settled on her. Lieutenant Thorn, center mat. The silence thickened. The men turned to watch as she stepped forward. Her stance was calm, efficient, nothing wasted. From the corner, Langford's eyes narrowed in recognition. He had seen that posture before. Kestrel removed his shirt, scars gleaming under the lights. He loomed over her, a predator about to remind the prey of his place. "In combat," he said to the class, "your enemy won't hold back because you're smaller." Then quieter to her, "This program ends today. Time to go home, Lieutenant." She shifted her stance. Feet placed just so, hands angled differently than the manual dictated. Langford heart kicked. He knew, and when Kestrel lunged, convinced he would prove her weakness, she moved. Not with strength, not with speed, with precision. The outsider was about to show them all why they were wrong. The combat training room carried the sharp tang of sweat and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing a sterile glare on the polished mats. Class 358 stood in tight formation, every trainee waiting, every chest heaving from the morning's punishment. Briar Thorn was a silent figure in the back row. She looked like one of them and not at all like them. Smaller, leaner, composed where the others shifted under the weight of fatigue. She kept her posture rigid, her eyes fixed forward, betraying nothing of what she felt. Senior Chief Kestrel strode in like a storm contained in human form. At 45, his body was still a testament to decades of discipline. Thick muscles moved under scarred skin, each line of damage earned in battle, not on a training mat. His presence filled the room with tension. "Today," he barked, "you'll learn how to fight when you've got nothing left but your hands. When the gun jams, when the blade breaks, when the only thing between you and death is whether you know how to use your body better than the other bastard." Pairs formed quickly under his command. Men locked arms and strained against each other, practicing holds, escapes, and counters. Kestrel stalked among them, correcting with clipped orders and sharp nudges. But each time his eyes passed over Thorn, he moved on. Deliberately, publicly, he excluded her. She didn't shift, didn't protest. She simply watched, her mind cataloging every motion, every mistake, every opportunity wasted. An hour passed before the question came. "Sir," White's voice carried across the room. His broad frame loomed above his partner, his grin visible even from the back. "Shouldn't female operators learn modified techniques? I mean, they'll never overpower a male combatant." A ripple of low laughter followed. Some of the instructors smirked openly. Kestrel turned slowly, letting the silence build. "Valid, tactical question," he said. His eyes locked on Thorn. "Lieutenant Thorn, center mat." The room went still. Boots shifted as every trainee angled for a better view. She stepped forward without hesitation, her movements measured, economical. No wasted energy, no nerves visible. Kestrel stripped off his instructor's shirt, his body corded with muscle, scars tracing his forearms like maps of old battles. He faced the class, voice pitched to reach every corner. "Let's demonstrate why weight classes exist in combat sports." He turned his gaze on her, voice dropping. "This ends today, Lieutenant. Time to go home." Thorn's stance shifted. It wasn't the regulation form they had been drilled in for weeks. It was something else, something older, sharper, feet angled with precision, hands lifted not in imitation of strength but in anticipation of movement. From the corner of the room, Master Chief Langford's eyes sharpened. Recognition flickered across his weathered face. He'd seen this before, though most in the room hadn't. "This is a restraint demonstration," Kestrel told the class. "I attack. She defends. Watch closely." He didn't wait for ceremony. His first lunge came hard and fast, the kind of move that overwhelmed smaller opponents. But Thorn didn't retreat. She pivoted, redirecting his momentum with the smallest adjustment. He stumbled past, forced to catch his balance. A murmur rippled through the formation. "Luck," someone whispered. Kestrel's jaw tightened. He pressed harder. Jab, cross, level change. A takedown that had floored countless men before. Thorn moved like water, slipping each strike, her body anticipating his rhythm. It wasn't just defense. It was prediction, mapping his choices before he made them. "Stop dancing," he snapped, frustration sharpening his voice. "This is an evasion." His next attack was harder, sloppier with anger. A looping haymaker. She didn't step back. She stepped in. The first strike was a blur. Her fingers landed on the radial nerve of his extended arm. His bicep twitched, his hand went numb. Confusion crossed his face. The second was a joint manipulation, redirecting his forward drive into imbalance. He staggered, his weight betrayed by his own momentum. The third, a sharp control press to the base of the skull, cut the lights. The sound of his body hitting the mat cracked through the silence like thunder. 4-3 heartbeats. No one moved. The trainees stood frozen, eyes wide, lungs forgetting how to breathe. The echo of that thud replayed in their minds on a loop. Thorn stepped back, resuming a neutral stance. Her face betrayed nothing, no triumph, no relief. She stood at parade rest, as if this had been routine, as if she hadn't just dropped one of the most feared instructors in the program. "Medics," Langford barked, his voice commanding, breaking the trance. They rushed forward, kneeling by Kestrel, checking his pulse, his airway. His eyes fluttered open moments later, his chest heaving. He groaned, trying to sit up. "What the hell was that?" he rasped. Langford's answer carried across the silent room. That was neural targeting. The future of close-quarters combat. He turned to class, sweeping their stunned faces. "You've been training beside Lieutenant Briar Thorn, formerly of Echo Sentinel. For those who don't know, Echo Sentinel was a joint special operations unit tasked with developing combat methods where conventional force failed. Lieutenant Thorn wasn't just a member. She was an instructor. What you saw here wasn't luck. It was science, applied with precision." The trainees shifted, their disbelief breaking into a mix of awe and unease. For weeks they had dismissed her as an experiment. Now they saw something far more dangerous. Kestrel, still unsteady, pushed himself to his feet with help from a medic. His pride was bruised deeper than his body. He fixed his gaze on Thorn, weighing her again with new eyes. Finally, he extended a hand. "I underestimated you, Lieutenant. Won't happen again." She clasped his hand firmly. "Your technique is textbook perfect, Senior Chief. But textbooks are always a generation behind reality." For a second, silence held. Then, from somewhere in formation, nervous laughter slipped out. It spread cautiously, a release of tension. Even Kestrel's mouth twitched in reluctant humor. The session ended not with dismissal, but with a shift in the air. Trainees who once avoided her now leaned forward, their curiosity burning. A few stepped closer, questions spilling out. "How did you hit that nerve so fast? Is it all anatomy-based? Could you show us again?" The barrier that had isolated her began to dissolve. That night, the whispers in the barracks weren't the same. They weren't mocking predictions of when she'd quit. They were arguments about what they had seen, speculation about her past, grudging admiration hidden in low tones. Some remained skeptical, clinging to the comfort of old certainties. But most knew what they'd witnessed wasn't trickery. It was a different language of combat. And for the first time, Briar Thorn wasn't just the outsider. She was the storm breaking into their world. The room was colder than usual, or maybe the class just felt that way. They filed into the combat facility at first light, and found both Senior Chief Kestrel and Lieutenant Briar Thorn at the front. Kestrel's face was composed, a steadiness that did not quite hide the memory of yesterday's fall. Thorn stood beside him, hands behind her back, eyes calm. "Change of plan," Kestrel said. "From today on, Lieutenant Thorne will co-instruct close-quarters combat. Some of what she teaches will push against what you know. That is intentional. The fight changes. We adjust." He stepped back. It was not grand, but everyone saw the choice. He was seating the floor. Thorne faced the class. Combat effectiveness is not strength against technique. It is the smart use of what you have against what the opponent cannot protect. Most of you think of the body like a lever. Start thinking of it like a circuit. She called Mercer to the mat. Former force recon. Calm under pressure, big enough to make a fair point. "Standard defensive stance," she said, and he set his feet. She traced the air near his wrist, elbow, jaw. She did not touch him at first, just mapped distance and angles. "Your radial nerve tracks here. Your brachial plexus rises between these two landmarks. The vagus rides this groove along the neck. You do not need to crush anything. You only need a short, precise interruption." She looked at Mercer. "Ready." He nodded. She stepped in and applied pressure to his forearm, a quick two-finger press that looked harmless. His grip opened like a door on a broken hinge. The class leaned in. She sat him down without force, then released. "This is not magic. It is anatomy. Learn to see the body as a set of reliable switches. Big muscles hide the wiring, but they do not change it." Pairs formed across the mats. The room shifted from suspicion to concentration. Men spoke in low voices. They compared what they felt. They corrected angles. Kestrel walked the line with Thorne. He watched her hands. He watched the trainees' faces when the technique worked. Every now and then he asked a question. It was never about whether. It was about when and how much. Wife, still bruised in pride and shoulder, went through the motions as if the floor owed him an apology. His partner winced and shook out a numb hand. "This is not a competition," Kestrel said, stopping beside them. "You are learning control, not collecting taps." "With respect, Senior Chief," White said, loud enough to carry. "Adrenaline changes everything. You do not have time for piano keys on nerves when someone wants your head." Thorne answered before Kestrel could. "Adrenaline speeds conduction. If I touch the right place under stress, it works faster, not slower." She lifted her chin toward Wythe. "You want to test it?" He glanced at Kestrel. A brief nod. "Control force," Kestrel warned. "No cheap shots. Maintain awareness." They took positions. Wythe charged like a lineman. Thorne moved on a 2 count. Step contact. She used his initial grab to locate the nerve at his triceps, a short press that broke the line of his strength. He overstepped and she marked 3 points in sequence: shoulder, neck, lower back. None looked painful. All of them were. His legs gave first. He was on the mat with his eyes wide, breath caught between anger and surprise. "Yield," he gasped. She released pressure and helped him up. "Pain is a message," she told the class. "We do not need to break anything if we can send the message to the right place." White rubbed his neck. "Try not to look rattled. How do you stop it if someone does it to you?" "Awareness," she said. "Do not offer the limb. Do not let them fix the angle. Once I have contact on the right point, resistance is expensive." They went back to drills. The room grew quieter. Even the skeptical men were watching their partners with new attention. They were not trying to muscle through. They were trying to read. Between groups, Kestrel stopped Thorne with a small gesture. That sequence on Wythe. Simultaneous clusters. High-risk extractions. Quiet rooms, crowded rooms, walls too thin to carry noise. It is a quick shutdown without lasting damage. She waited. "You can teach it in steps." He nodded once. "We will." By mid-morning, the rhythm had changed. The class moved like a unit instead of a row of competing bodies. The old way had not disappeared. It had a new layer. They drilled grip breaks, then nerve cueing, then transitions back to takedowns that looked familiar but now felt different in the joints. After dismissal, the men spilled into the mess hall. The usual wide circle around Thorne never formed. Mercer slid his tray across from hers and started a quiet question about landmarking under heavy clothing. White arrived 2 minutes later. Less chest, more curiosity. Others followed. It was not warm, not yet, but the sharp edges had dulled. Kestrel watched from the entryway. His gaze flicked toward the instructor's table, where Commander Ridley sat with two others, their conversation clipped and private. Ridley's eyes cut to Thorne and then away. Nothing explicit. Clear enough. Kestrel found Thorne as she cleared her tray. "Watch your six," he said. "Ridley does not like any of this. He thinks the program is turning into a showcase." "Noted," she said. She did not add anything. He seemed to appreciate that. In the afternoon, Hemlock asked for a minute outside near the equipment shed. He stood with his hands on his hips, face drawn in a way that looked older than he was. "I lost a teammate in Kandahar," he said. Strong, brave, the kind of guy you follow through a wall. 2 hostiles in a room the size of a closet. He beat the first. The second was behind the door. "I still wake up at the piece I miss." He lifted his eyes to hers. "What you showed today. If I had known that then." Thorne held his gaze. "You did what you could with what you had. The point of training is to give you more for next time." She paused. "We put the neural drills into the regular schedule tomorrow. You'll not need to ask after hours." He exhaled, the sound close to relief. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Back in the training hall, Kestrel and Thorne ran an evening block for volunteers from other classes. Word had spread. The room was full. They taught the basics hard and clean. No secrets. No mystique. Kestrel demonstrated entries and control that he had spent years perfecting. Thorne threaded the nerve work through the spaces he opened. Their timing adjusted with each rep until it felt less like an argument and more like a conversation. During a water break, Kestrel leaned on the wall beside her. "I fought this," he said quietly. "Told the Admiral it was politics. I was wrong." She shrugged. "You had limited information." "I had stubborn information," he said. "That is worse." He cracked a brief smile, then returned to the floor and corrected a trainee's posture with 2 calm words. The men saw it. Respect does not always need a speech. At night, the base looked like a different world. Fluorescence from the admin building made bright squares on the ground. Langford crossed the courtyard with a folder under his arm and stepped into Admiral Kswick's office. The space was spare, the walls lined with maps and photographs, the desk neat to a fault. "Progress report," Langford said, setting down a drive. "Integration ahead of schedule. Resistance is there but softening." Kswick clicked the remote. Training footage unfolded on the screen. Kestrel and Thorne moved in lockstep, while pairs of trainees practiced around them. The Admiral watched in silence for a full minute. "She pulled the strike on Kestrel," Langford said. "You can see it here. Could have put him down for longer." "Good," Kswick said. "I chose her for that judgment as much as a skill." He let the video play a moment more. Phase 2 after Hell Week. She will need a selection list. Keep the circle small. Understood. Kswick paused at the black folder on his desk. He did not open it. No talk of Silverfin. They have enough on their minds. Langford nodded and left as quietly as he had come. The week slid by with the new rhythm. Morning surf, runs on wet sand, punishment that scraped them raw. Midday blocks in the combat room, where old lessons braided with new. The trainees began to talk in a different way. They asked not only how to hit harder, but how to see sooner. They caught angles before they formed. They guarded space that had been invisible to them a week ago. Hemlock's eyes stopped darting to the corners of the room whenever a drill started. Wythe learned to ease his grip and found he could control more with less. Mercer became the class anchor for detail, catching small errors and fixing them in a sentence. On Friday night, after final roll call, Thorne returned to her quarters and pulled a fresh photo from a pocket. Not a mission shot, just a grainy image a trainee had printed from the training feed. Class 358 in a loose group on the mat, heads turned toward her with the kind of focus that cannot be faked. She slipped it into the footlocker beside the old one. The lid closed with a soft click. Outside, the wind off the Pacific carried salt and a promise of cold. Across the parade ground, Kestrel and Langford walked the perimeter in quiet steps. "You think they are ready?" Kestrel asked, not fully a question. "They are as ready as anyone can be Langford said. They have more tools than they did. That matters. Kestrel rubbed a faint ache at his neck. She changed the room. Good, Langford said. The room needed changing. Sunday night arrived like the edge of a cliff. The class checked gear, taped hot spots on their feet, wrote quiet notes on index cards that no one admitted to having. The bell hung in the dark, a reminder of what waited for the ones who could not keep going. Thorne stood alone on the beach for a minute before lights out. The surf tugged at the shore. Tomorrow would drown them in cold and exhaustion, then drag them back and ask for more. She breathed in, steady and deep, and let the breath go. In the morning, the Pacific would turn black again. The boats would come up on their shoulders. The world would shrink to the next step, the next breath, the next decision. Integration was no longer a topic. It was habit. It would have to hold when everything else fell away. The bell waited in the center of the compound, polished in the hands of men who had quit before them. Its silence was a weight heavier than the sandbags slung across Class 358's shoulders. Everyone knew before dawn broke that Hell Week had arrived. The Pacific was black and restless, the kind of cold that crept into marrow and stayed. The recruits formed a ragged line at the water's edge. The instructors loomed like silhouettes carved from iron, voices booming against the surf. 5 days, Kestrel shouted. No sleep, no mercy. You will break, or you will prove you belong here. Eyes flicked toward the bell, a reminder that there was always a way out. Briar Thorne adjusted the strap of the inflatable boat across her shoulder, the rubber pressing to bone, the salt water soaking into her fatigues. She felt the familiar ache in her ribs and the fire in her palms where old rope burns had never fully healed. The body hurt. That was the point. The body always hurt. She glanced down the line. White scowled into the surf, jaw clenched, his strength undeniable but untested against exhaustion. Hemlock stood taller than he had weeks ago, eyes steady, guilt no longer the shadow on his face. Mercer muttered quiet calculations under his breath, a habit that helped him lock focus. Each man bore the marks of the last month. Leaner, harder, stripped down to something closer to the bone. They weren't the same group that had once jeered at her in the mess hall. Not anymore. The whistle cut the air. They surged forward, waves slapping against their shins, then their thighs, then their chests. The ocean swallowed them in an instant, numbing nerves, stealing breath. The boat slammed down on their heads with every crest. They pushed, teeth chattering, arms shaking, lungs burning. Thorne kept her place at the rear, not because she couldn't lead, but because someone had to keep the line together when it began to fray. Efficiency, not ego. She locked her breathing into rhythm, and on the wave, out on the push. She had learned long ago that survival meant marrying yourself to the cadence of pain. Hours blurred. Sunlight broke over the horizon, casting gold on the surf, but offered no warmth. The instructors shouted until their throats were raw, dragging the boats higher, ordering burpees in the sand, plunging them back into the tide. Every exercise designed to strip away the illusion of strength until only resolve remained. By midday, the class resembled a collection of hollow-eyed ghosts. Salt crusted on their faces. Lips cracked. Arms trembled. Hydrate, then hit the obstacle course, Garrett barked. They staggered inland, boots squelching. The course was a web of ropes, walls, and pits designed to break coordination in tired bodies. Men slipped, cursed, dragged themselves up again. Thorne climbed hand over hand, her palms raw, her shoulders screaming. She did not race. She did not falter. She moved with the same methodical precision that had carried her from Afghanistan to this place. At the top of the rope, she paused long enough to scan the ground below. Weiss stumbled, catching himself before a fall. Hemlock helped a smaller trainee through a gap in the wall, his hand steady, his voice calm. They were holding, but barely, that night, or what passed for night in a schedule stripped of sleep. The class huddled on the beach around the boats. The wind cut through wet uniforms. The instructors paced behind them, waiting for someone to stand, to walk to the bell. Thorne sat with her back against the hull, her breath fogging in the cold. Around her, men shifted, teeth chattering, some whispering curses at the endless grind. The Pacific hissed and roared like it knew every secret weakness in their bones. Hemlock leaned closer. You ever feel like this is less training and more survival lottery? She met his eyes. It's both, but survival isn't luck. It's choosing moment after moment not to quit. His jaw flexed. He nodded, the words lodging somewhere deep. Minutes dragged. Then a voice, soft but audible. Lieutenant. Fitzgerald, one of the youngest. His face was pale, lips blue. Any advice? For staying awake. The group went quiet, listening. Thorne considered. She could have given him a technical answer about pressure points to stave off fatigue, or tricks for micro-rest in seconds stolen between movements. Instead, she said, remember why you're here. Not for the instructors, not for the tests, for the people who will need you one day, when you're all that stands between them and disaster. Anchor yourself to that. The silence held for a long moment. Then wife, voice hoarse, said, not bad, Lieutenant. Better than Garrick's speeches, anyway. A ripple of tired laughter broke the tension. The line between them thinned. By the third day, time was meaningless. They were pulled from the surf only to be buried in sand, then sent back into the water again. The instructors howled at them, promised of misery, dared them to quit. One trainee did. He stumbled toward the bell at dawn, tears mixing with salt water. The clang echoed, hollow and final. No one jeered. No one spoke. Each man felt the weight of it in his own bones. But Class 358 kept moving. Thorne kept moving. She was everywhere. In the rear, pushing the slowest forward. In the middle, steadying pace. At the front, when the line began to falter. She wasted nothing. She spoke little. Her presence was enough. By the fifth night, they were half dead. Faces hollow, voices slurred, movements mechanical. But when the instructors barked orders, they moved. When the waves demanded, they lifted their boats. When the bell glimmered in the corner of their vision, they looked away. At dawn on the final day, the sun rose slow and merciless over the Pacific. The class stumbled onto the beach, their boots dragging furrows in the sand. Form up. Kestrel's voice cracked like a whip. His eyes scanned the line, hard but with a glint that hadn't been there before. Pride disguised the severity. 42 had started. Less than 30 stood now. All of them broken, all of them unbent. Kestrel let the silence stretch. Then, finally, you've survived Hell Week. You've done what most cannot. You're not done yet, but you're closer. His gaze lingered on Thorne. A silent acknowledgement. She stood straight, her face pale, eyes hollowed by exhaustion, but her body steady. She had carried her own weight and more. She had carried them all in ways most of them were only beginning to understand. As the class shuffled off the beach, Langford's voice was low in Kestrel's ear. She didn't just survive. She changed the way they see themselves. Kestrel nodded, eyes still on Thorne's retreating figure, and the way I see her. That evening, in the privacy of her barracks, Thorne slid a new photograph into her footlocker. Not the old shadows of Afghanistan, not the faces she left behind. This one was different. Class 358, gaunt and battered, gathered on the beach with the sun behind them, the beginnings of a team. She closed the lid, her hand resting on the metal. The work wasn't finished. The hardest challenges still loomed, whispering the Admiral's words about Phase 2 and Silver Fin. But Hell Week was over. The threshold had been crossed. And for the first time since she arrived, Briar Thorne wasn't just surviving. She was leading.